Okay, let's kick things off. Hopefully you can all hear me and also see me and also see my slides. If not, please do drop me a message and I'll fix it. But yeah, welcome everyone to our open day. My name is Will. What we're going to be talking about today is the medicine interviews. So if you're not studying medicine, this might not actually be super helpful for you. But if you are studying medicine, hopefully, this is actually gives you a bit of a better understanding of what's to come. Hopefully you feel a bit more comfortable at the end of it. But yeah, so we're talking about medicine interviews. If you know someone who's thinking of applying for, physics or maths or natural sciences, then, it might be better for them to come along next week. If you are someone who's wanting to study one of those subjects, then yeah, better to come along next week. It'll be at the same time. I did a very bad job of introducing myself. Like I said, my name is Will. I studied experimental psychology at Oxford. I then ran the consulting team at UniAdmissions. And this year I'm actually doing a master's in neuroscience. And I still help out with the consulting side of things here and there where I can around my course. One of those things is occasionally stepping in for the open days to talk about the various topics that we like to talk about. For those of you that have been to one of these before, it's going to be the exact same structure, format as usual. For those of you that haven't, basically what we do is each week we pick a topic that we think people will want to hear about. So we're talking about interviews these days because they're coming up. So what I'll talk about is medical interviews, both at Oxford and Cambridge, but also, at non-Oxbridge universities. Talk about that for a little bit, then talk about, preparing for these interviews. I highly recommend that you at least spend some time thinking about them before you walk into them, particularly for things like MMIs. Those are definitely things that you want to have had a bit of a go at beforehand. And I'll talk a bit about, the way that we approach things. There may be some of you who are here who aren't actually applying for this year and who are applying for next year. And I'll talk a bit about what the overall support might look like. But for those of you thinking, well, not thinking about, who are applying this year, actually it would be a lot more tailored, and I'll explain that more as I go through it. And then after that, we will do a bit of a Q&A. It's a bit of a smaller group this week, which will mean actually that the Q&A can be a bit more specific for you guys. Often it will be, if there's sort of many people, I have to be quite broad in what I'm saying. Otherwise, it sort of stops being helpful for the majority of people. But actually, we should be able to go through things in a bit of detail. Someone's asked how long this will take. It does vary. Depends on how many questions you guys have. Normally, there have been seminars which open days, sorry, which have been so busy and people have had so many questions that we've run into sort of 2 hours long. Normally, I sort of curtail things at around an hour and a half. Okay. So that's plenty of me talking about stuff, but also usually that last 30 minutes is Q&A. And again, that will take us long. If you guys keep having questions for me, I will keep answering them. Read the questions. There is a Q&A function here. If you have a question midway through, I probably won't stop to answer it. I'll probably carry on talking about what I'm talking. And then what I do at the end is I'll run through all of them. So if you have a question, I will get round to it, I promise. But do drop it in the Q&A. Don't wait until the end because you might forget. And to be honest, if you forget, obviously you won't then get the answer to that question that you had, but also there might be someone else that might benefit from that answer as well. So asking questions is a noble thing. Please do it. We can get a bit of a discussion going on at the end. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense of what to expect, what's coming up. In terms of talking about medicine interviews today, there are a few different things to talk about. So firstly, you're all probably wondering, well, what are the chances of me getting an interview? And we'll talk about that. Obviously, it's a very individual thing, and it will depend on how things have been going so far. But normally, when students or parents get in touch with us, and I'm speaking with them and we're discussing the application, normally I like to think with pretty good accuracy, I'm able to predict where they'll get interviews. And that's basically based on what's been happening so far. So, you can do, and I'll tell you a bit about how to do that. And hopefully you should be able to get a bit of a sense based on your grades, based on your UCAT, your BMAT, based on where you've applied. You should be able to then have a sense of, okay, I'm 90% confident I'll get interviews at these 2 universities, a bit less confident about these 2, and that's fine. So we'll talk a bit about that. I'll also talk about what to expect in the interview. Hopefully you've all got a decent idea, but it's still an important thing to cover. I'm not comfortable with the idea that some people who, maybe their school doesn't know too much about it, they just have no idea what to expect. That's not a great position to be in, and hopefully this could help with that. And I'll also talk about, what is the point of these interviews? Why are they doing them? What do they want from you? Inevitably, people also ask, when will I hear about interviews? So I'll discuss that as well. The short answer is it depends, but I'll talk a bit more about that later on, probably when we're talking about whether or not you'll get an interview. So, getting an interview. Ultimately, it comes down to 2 things. The proportion of students that university is going to interview and how well you're doing in the application process so far. So we talk about the different things that the universities are looking at and how they weight things. And this is the pie chart that we use as a bit of it's a sort of a bit of a rule of thumb for it. But this is more accurate for Oxford and Cambridge. And the reason is different medical schools all approach things slightly differently. Okay, so this weighting can swing way in the favor of the admissions test, or it could swing way in the favor of GCSE grades. Ultimately, whichever way it swings, hopefully you've applied to ones which sort of favor what you've done well at. So if you've got good GCSEs, hopefully, you've applied to universities which value that. But ultimately, when you're thinking, so if you're sat there thinking, what chances do I have at getting an interview? You can have this in mind, and you should be thinking, okay, well, how much of this pie do I think I have filled? So if you've got perfect exam grades and you're applying to, let's say, Cambridge for medicine, then that first blue chunk, which represents your exam grades, you've got all of that. Okay. Now, naturally, as a Cambridge applicant, because most Cambridge students are pretty good, a lot of your competitors will have all of that, but you've got that. You hopefully also have a bit of a sense of how well the BMAT went. I know there were some troubles actually being able to do it, but hopefully you've got a sense of whether or not you did fantastically or terribly or somewhere in the middle. But you'll also know in a couple of weeks' time exactly how well you've done. So you'll have a more accurate sense there, but you should have a bit of a sense of sort of how much of that orange chunk you've achieved. And you should be able to, when it says everything else, basically that is things like the personal statement, the SAQ if you are applying to Cambridge, work experience, things like that. So you should have, obviously you haven't interviewed yet, so that's not part of the decision-making process yet, but you should have a sense of how much of these chunks you have. And actually, if you're doing very well, if you've got great GCSEs and you think you did very well in the BMAT and you got a flawless personal statement that you were very happy with, then you should be in the position where you feel pretty confident that you might get an interview somewhere. We can then sort of compare that with, I'm not going to talk too much about GCSEs actually. We could talk about that a bit at the end because normally people ask questions regardless of how much I talk about it. What I really wanted to talk about was this. The proportion of students that the university that you've applied to are going to interview. So I'll use the top 2 as a good example. If you're applying to Cambridge and you feel like you're, probably about mean for a Cambridge applicant, you're sort of mean GCSEs, average, mean BMAT score, mean personal statement, right in the middle, you'll get an interview because they're going to interview the vast majority of their applicants. Very few people don't actually get interviewed by Cambridge. Whereas if you're the exact same student, but you've applied to Oxford, it's much less likely that you'll get the interview because they don't. They interview far fewer, and it can actually be less than 40%. The London universities, it does vary a lot. Some of them do go up to about a third of applicants they interview. And we have noticed that I think Imperial, or it was even Imperial or UCL in particular, were interviewing more since interviews moved online. But roughly a good range is sort of between 20 and 40% across the country is the sort of interview rate. So what you want to do then is be thinking about how well you're doing so far across those things that you're being measured on, and then compare that with how many people they're actually going to invite to interview. Okay, that's something that students often forget to do, and don't use that as part of their decision-making process. For any of you who are not applying this year and applying next year, this is actually quite a helpful tool in deciding where you might want to apply. For those of you applying this year, it's too late to really make changes. But for those of you that haven't yet, you can sort of preempt this conundrum, do it early, and then come out of that applying to universities where you actually feel you'll get an interview at all of them. Well, obviously, you won't know how well the BMAT has gone, but you can make some assumptions and you can make some good guesswork, and ultimately that's the best thing that you can do, good predictions based on good information. So yeah, and often people think, oh well, I might actually apply to Cambridge because I know I'll get an interview. Well, I'm confident I'll get an interview, and that's actually quite important. Let's talk about when you might get asked to interview. So Oxford and Cambridge, if you are applying to Oxford and Cambridge for medicine, they do their interviews in the first few weeks of December. So, in a month's time, you'll be right in the middle, well, near the end for Cambridge of interview season. And the amount of notice they give you is pretty sporadic. It varies enormously, and I still have yet to work out what actually determines how much it varies. I have no idea what it's based on. It's very difficult to work out. Broadly speaking, what I see most commonly is between 5 and 10 days notice. So if the interviews are in the first couple of weeks of December, you're probably going to find out sort of end of November. So there's not a huge amount of notice. So actually what you kind of want to do is do this exercise of working out if you'll get interviews and then start preparing, because you shouldn't really wait. In terms of other universities, it's worth saying as well, I have heard tell that some people have been given interview offers to Oxford and Cambridge already. I don't know if that's for medicine, but again, this is just, that is a huge range, a month to 5 days. It's crazy. In terms of the other universities, you will find out anywhere between, and this is very vague and unhelpful, but anywhere between basically early December to March. Some students get very anxious because you get to January, you get to the new year and you think, oh, I haven't heard anything yet. That is not an indication of anything really. It doesn't mean that they're not really considering you. It doesn't mean that they think you're sort of on the lower end of the cohort that they're inviting to interviews. It's just how it works. They interview people in rounds. Just by probability, it might be that your 4 medical schools, you're in the last round for all of them. Not a fun position to be in. Lots of students can get very stressed, but try not to worry about it too much. The best you can do is just prepare and sort of keep making sure that when you do get asked to interview, you're able to do the best that you can do, because you really want to make the most of this opportunity. I'm sure there may be some questions more specifically about individual medical schools. When I say December to March, that sort of encompasses all of them, but different medical schools will have different periods within that. So some medical schools might do all their interviews from January to February and they're done. And actually you can find this information out very easily. They usually have it on their website somewhere. If you Google it, that's usually the best way to find out for the ones that you're applying to. Okay, so what is the interview actually going to be like? And when we're talking about medicine, we've got 2 kinds of interviews to talk about. The first thing to say is there is still the conception that, certainly for Oxford and Cambridge interviews, that it's very unstandardized. It's sort of very arcane and kind of strange. I mean, they still ask you hard questions, definitely, but actually what they have is a pretty rigorous process to make sure that everyone is being assessed as fairly as possible. You almost always be interviewed by two people. They will basically compare right after you go, which is a bit stressful, knowing that they're going to be reviewing you immediately after you leave. But actually what it means is, they don't come back to it a week later and really they've forgotten and they hadn't written that good notes anyway. There's lots of, checks and balances here to make sure, that ultimately Oxford and Cambridge take on the best students that they can. And of course, the MMIs are very standardized. Naturally, a more open sort of 30-minute discussive interview, you will likely be talking about different things to the person who comes after you. Whereas an MMI station, actually you're calculating BMI and the next person will be calculating BMI at that station and the person after that. So it's as standardized a process as it can be. Obviously, there's still differences. But, if you're worried about perhaps the system not really being fair, I wouldn't. I'd be more worried about making sure that you are a strong candidate and you're potentially a good interviewee. And talking about good interviewees, what does that actually look like? Naturally, it's not that easy. You won't have cracked it after listening to me talk for half an hour, but hopefully I can give you a bit of a sense in terms of what you might want to be working on in the next month. So naturally, they'll know that you're pretty good academically, right? You've got good grades, you did well in the admissions test, you're at the interview stage. They know that actually the person that we've invited is academically strong. It's not so much what they're assessing. They can ask you pretty tricky technical questions, and they will. But it's more a matter of seeing how you handle the information rather than sort of what information you can handle, if that makes sense. That they're looking for your ability to, very often they purposefully try and think up of questions that you won't know the answer to. So in my second and third year, I helped run interviews at my college when I was at Christchurch. And that meant, spending time speaking with the college professor who was sort of the head of psychology at that college and would run the interviews. And each year, his challenge is to think up of a question which he is as confident as possible no one will have spent much time handling before. Now, that's difficult because he has no idea what all those interview candidates have been reading. He has no idea what kind of things they know, but he genuinely tries to pick a topic that no one will have any sort of advantage on. So it's as pure an assessment of how you handle new information. That's how he explained it to me. So actually, trying to just absorb as much information as you can as your preparation probably isn't the best way to do it, or isn't the best way to approach this. You could think, well, you could try and take him on and say, well, I will learn everything, and that way you can't ask me something that I don't know about. But actually, that's still not actually the best thing to do. It could be detrimental to not be approaching it fresh. Because if you get asked a question that you think relates to a topic that you think you know about, and it isn't actually that related, potentially it's got some surface similarities, but actual core similarities aren't there. Sort of structurally, they are different topics. You might actually say things which are wrong and be quite firm on them because you know, but actually approaching it as a new topic is probably the best way to do it. But you want to get good at that. You want to try and immerse yourself in new topics and just discuss them with people as much as you can. There's also, so this metacognition side of things is actually quite an important one. People are very worried about saying things that are wrong in an interview, in an Oxford style interview, but actually that's fine. You can say something that's wrong. I definitely said things that were wrong, but you need to be able to reason your way away from bad ideas, basically. It's fine for you to say something that's, wrong, but then if you realize, oh, actually, hold on, that's not a good argument to be making based on the information that I've got, that's a really important skill that they're looking for. And that's going to be fine. If you get something wrong, do not worry about it. Notice it, explain it. Actually, I don't think that's the right conclusion to make here. Given X, Y, or Z, I think this is more likely. That's basically what they're looking for. They're looking for someone who can not get lost in sort of a spiral of the wrong thinking. And we talk a lot about soft skills. The example here that I like the most actually is the knowing versus teaching concept. It's quite easy. Well, depends on the concept, but it's relatively easy to think that you know something, you know a topic, you understand something. It's harder to explain that to someone who's never approached it before. One thing that I would recommend is get a member of your family to, take some time out of their day to sit down with you and explain something complicated that you know to them, and see how well you can do it. If they don't understand what you're talking about, then that's a problem, and that's something which will come up, will sort of rear its head in the interviews, because actually it's hard to explain something. Teaching is not easy, so being able to sort of bridge that gap is quite important. And again, it's practice, it's patience, but those are things that you want to start doing now. Ultimately, it's not something, if you struggle with explaining things to people, that's not something that you can just cram overnight. That is something that takes consistent practice. Use all the time you have. Very often, the very academic students struggle in interviews because they're very good at the knowing side of things, but they're not very good at the teaching side of things. If you're worried that might be you, then that's really something to focus on in this next month. Okay. Particularly as you're all hoping to be doctors, the soft skills are really, really important, more so than it is for a physicist who's interviewing at Oxford. If you're interviewing for medicine at Birmingham, they are looking for people who can explain things. People skills are really, really important for doctors. One of the big exams in your last year is effectively a people skills exam, and that's what they're looking for. And then, of course, also the interest, right? You've told them on your personal statement how interested you are in medicine, how inspired you were when you were at a young age, or you saw some amazing surgery and you thought, that's what I want to do. You've told them you've been doing lots of wider reading. You say medicine is your passion. But does that actually come across? Can they see that? Are you actually interested and enthusiastic about the things that you're talking about? And if you aren't, then that's going to sort of be a bit of a red flag for them. Medicine is no easy thing. If you think A-levels and doing your A-levels as well as applying for medicine has been tricky, it's a tough degree, and it's a tough job. If you're going to get through it, you need to really want to do it. That is one of the things that a lot of people who are in maybe their second or third year will tell you, I'm sure. So they need to see that you are very highly applied, you're very interested and enthusiastic in this topic, in the subject, and you're able to become, and you're able to engage with it, basically, engage with the content that they're asking you about. And they're also looking at your ability to be able to sort of work through things, and this thing at the bottom saying, be able to break free from unproductive thinking. That's what I was talking about earlier, in terms of the noticing when you've potentially said something incorrect, notice when you've made a poor conclusion, and then correct it, basically. Communication, I don't think I need to talk about that too much. They need to be able to understand what you're talking about. And people often ask, well, will be a bit more specific. What questions am I actually going to be asked? And these are questions which can come up at MMI or come up in a 30-minute standard interview. So hopefully this gives you a bit of a idea of what to expect. I will go through them, but it's worth saying that if you are in your preparation trying to find more, you can find these examples. You can find them online. You can buy books for it, but you can also find them online. I would urge you to be careful when finding them online and make sure that you're getting it from a source which is reliable, because you want to make sure that if you are learning or getting a bit of a sense of what kind of things you're going to be asked, you want to make sure that they are the kind of things that are actually going to be asked. So, excuse me. How have technological advances changed medical practice? Hopefully this is something which you actually have some specific understanding of. If you have applied yourself at all to any medical reading, you probably have a decent understanding of a good answer to that question. Even if you haven't, you probably just have a sense of the way that actually technology has improved so much, particularly in the medical field, that you can talk about it. But really, this is going to show them who is engaging with medicine outside of their subjects and who isn't. You are a junior doctor on colorectal surgery. Your consultant in charge turn up on Monday morning smelling strongly of alcohol. What do you do? This is a very sort of classic SJT question. This is a bit more of your sort of your ethics, I suppose. And it's not. This is much more likely to come up in an MMI, not in an Oxford style interview. Do doctors hold a special position in society? And the next one, do you think nurses are important? Are sort of assessing similar things. It's looking a bit into sort of your motivation to want to be a doctor, but also sort of how self-important you are. What they don't want is for you to say, actually, nurses, they don't really do that much. Because anyone who is actually doing medicine, if any of your parents are doctors, will very happily tell you that nurses do a hell of a lot. It's for screening out the people who sort of have a bit of a doctor-based God complex. They want normal, rational, sensible people who are engaged in medicine and have decent ethics. And, from this last one, have actually applied themselves to volunteering work, but also have, I think, engaged with volunteering work rather than just sort of shown up, done it, left, actually engaged with it on emotional, cognitive level. This is sort of an advance on the classic, tell me about some work experience you've done. Tell me about a time when you felt sad when doing your charity work. It's actually a really good question because ultimately doing charity work is obviously really nice, but there's a underlying sadness to it, right? Whatever you're doing your charity work for, it's probably quite a sad cause. It could be that it's sort of homeless charities. It could be that it's international foreign aid. Either way, you're trying to fix a problem, which is a sad problem. And you're probably, particularly if you're working with homeless people, you're probably going to hear lots of sort of sad stories. And again, they're looking for have you actually engaged with that? Have you engaged with it on a personal level? If you have, this should be a relatively easy question to answer. If you haven't, if you've just shown up because you knew you had to do work experience to get into medicine, but you didn't actually want to do it, you're going to struggle with this one. And then sort of, MMIs, how does that fit in? Obviously, some MMIs have loads of stations, and they can be very short as well, sort of 5-6 minutes for some medical schools, longer for others. If you don't know what to expect, again, have a look on the universities that you're applying to, have a look at on their webpage. They will say somewhere, they will have information about the nature of their MMIs. They also will potentially email you with some more information as well. So if you're sat there thinking, I don't know if I'm going to have 10 or 5 stations, it's worth knowing that before going in. And it's worth knowing that now, because then when you practice, you can try and make it as lifelike as possible. But of course, you've got lots of different things that are going to happen. So role plays are very common. Professional judgment sort of relates to that. Your supervisor shows up drunk question. Prioritization is a very important thing in the NHS. Assessing where you would, it's usually going to be around limited resources. And they say, should you be spending time with X patient or Y patient, and why? Why do you prioritize X over Y or Y over X? Data analysis, again, this is a bit more of a technical one. It's worth preparing for it. The example that I often give is that you could be asked to have a look at someone's BMI, for example, and sort of explain it, which is quite an interesting thing to be doing. Again, I would get used to or get into the habit of practicing that a little bit. Not only practicing BMI stuff, but you can look up what kind of things to expect and have a go at those. With the BMI example, often they'll ask you to, or they have done in the past, one of the stations will be to calculate the BMI, and then a couple of stations later, explain why BMI is used, why it's a good measure, why it's a bad measure, that kind of thing. Okay. On the personal statements, lots of people sort of are very worried about this. It's not necessarily going to come up, but it could come up. What you don't really want to do, which I did actually, is when it does come up, have completely forgotten what you wrote about. So I would just make sure that you go through your personal statement. I would make sure that if you've said you've done something on it, that you have actually done it. So if you say that you've read a book and you're actually only halfway through, I'd finish it off. If you say you've read some scientific papers, I would read them. Just make sure that you've actually done the stuff that you said you've done, and just make sure that you know what you've told them you've done, because they could bring it up. It's less likely to come up in an MMI. It could come up in a Oxford, Cambridge sort of panel style interview. But again, it's really down to the individual tutor, what they want to do. There's no mandate, you have to ask about the personal statement or you can't ask about the personal statement. It's more down to the individual professor, what they think is valuable to actually be asking students. These other points are all, hopefully very clear. So the one thing that I do notice in students, particularly when they do their first mock interviews, is they often rush. There's no need to rush. Taking time to consider your answer is actually sort of, they like that. They want to see that you're actually thinking about what you're going to say before you say it. You can ask for clarifications. You could respond to their question with another question to ask, is there any more data that I can use for this? Or, ask them to clarify some things that they said. That's fine. Don't start answering a question if you're not actually sure what the question is asking you. Much better to get a good sense. And they're not going to start scribbling down needed to ask questions about our question. They're going to want you to actually be engaging with what they're saying properly. The last point, remember, you are there to learn, not to teach. Ultimately, these, particularly for the Oxford and Cambridge interviews, they're designed to emulate a tutorial. So it's designed to give them as good an idea of what will this student be like in a year's time if we take them on. What will they be like in those discussions? How will they handle it? And so actually, it's a fantastic opportunity. You will hopefully have some really interesting discussions. I certainly enjoyed my interviews a lot. It can be tricky to enjoy things when you're nervous, but actually, even if my approach at the time was, even if I got no further after this, what a fantastic experience to discuss a subject that I love with some very clever, intelligent people. Now, naturally, we want you all to get your medical offers. So obviously we want to get further than just the interview stage, but it is a good experience. Do make the most of it, particularly if you're applying to Oxford or Cambridge, enjoy it. And that's sort of the end of what I wanted to talk about, re the medical interviews. We talked a bit about, how to work out if you're going to get interviews, how to work out, when you might be asked to interview, and then sort of what to expect, what it looks like, what kind of things they might be looking for. I will talk a bit about sort of how we support students that come our way. Naturally, some students feel like they want some support, some students don't. If you're one of those students who is thinking, actually, I kind of want to do this on my own, hopefully at least this gives you a bit of an idea of what you ought to be doing. And if you're a student who isn't super sure if they can do it on their own, or they don't have support from school, which is quite common these days, sadly, this will give you a bit of a sense of what we do. If you are looking for support, or if, regardless of what that actually looks like, or if you know what that looks like, you will have to speak with us. Okay, we don't take on students without having spoken with them, and then one of the consulting team will actually make a recommendation for what they think is right for you. And it's worth saying, for those of you applying for interviews this year, if you were to come to us, your support would be very specific to that. Whereas if you are applying for next year, which, well done you for being so proactive. Naturally, the program's a little larger. Broadly, there are 4 pillars to our support. And again, if you're doing this on your own, you might want to try and emulate that if you can, if you have the wherewithal to do that. The first is having a tutor, right? This is someone who has been through this process already, so is a medical student most likely, they've had it, they've been through this interview process just a few years ago themselves. They know what it's like, they know what to expect, and they, importantly, managed it and have helped other people do well in it too. So the one-to-one tuition is quite an important part of things, and it does make a big difference, particularly for things like interviews. The admissions test, or written exams, they are things that you can, to a degree, prepare for a bit more yourself, but it's very difficult to give yourself a mock interview and assess yourself fairly. And it's difficult to say to your brother or your sister, can you give me a mock interview? Because again, they're unlikely to know really what it's like. So that's really, really important. But of course, we expect quite a lot of our students, because we want them to work very hard and we want them to succeed and do well in life. But we want them to be working outside of those tutorials. So for us, when we're supporting students, it's not a case of come to the tutorial. Once you leave the tutorial, you can just switch off. We're very much expecting you to sort of work outside of it, work on things that your tutors sort of guided you to do. They will always give you things to work on and to help you improve and to think about. This is actually from a mock interview. So, the mock interviews you do with different tutors each time. So you don't have follow-on sessions with that individual tutor, but they will sort of tell you where you've done well, where you've done badly. And they'll tell you during the tutorial, but also you've got something to refer back to as well, which is quite important. The second part of the support is the materials. So what we've done over the years is compiled a huge amount, really, of material for students to work through. Particularly for those admissions tests. I know a lot of you will have gotten through that hurdle. Congratulations. But, that is something which actually just working through lots and lots of practice questions. I mean, similarly for the interviews, it's just, practice is so important. But having those materials means that when your tutor says, look, you need to work on this before I see you next week, you have everything you need to be able to do that. That's so, so, so important. I think we have a brief clip of, hold on, I need to share my sounds. But so this gives you a bit of a sense of what it looks like. So this is our portal that students will use to access all their materials. It's been updated since this, so there's a lot more to it, but it should, if this can work, it should give you a bit of a sense of, what is in there. I think this is specific to the admissions tests. But, similarly for interviews, again, just having the materials to work through, to learn, to sort of practice is so important. It's of course a skill that takes time to develop, but you can see here, one thing is to learn the content. The next thing, this specifically for the admissions test, the next thing is to really practice. And I would be astonished if any of our students have actually made it through all of our practice questions, because there's a lot of them. I mean, our students work really, really hard to get where they want to get to. So actually they probably have, but you can never be over practiced in something like this. What you want to do really is walk into an exam, walk into an interview, and it feel completely natural and you have zero surprises. That means that you prepared well. If you can walk into that interview and you're super confident, you can sit down, you can tackle it, then you've done everything you needed to. You'll still be a little nervous, I promise you. I was, even though I felt very a bit overly confident, I was still very nervous, because it's a nerve-wracking experience. The third part of our support is enrichment seminars. So what we do is we get our students to sort of partake in a subject-specific seminar every weekend. So on Sunday afternoons, our students will be learning something about their topic, and it's aimed at the sort of early university level. So it is designed to push you. It's designed to be tricky. It's designed to make you think about tricky things. But it's designed so that, again, like I was saying before, once you come into those interviews, actually, you've kind of been doing this every week. You know what you're doing. You've been handling difficult topics for a while, and it should come as second nature, basically. What we do is we split our students into different subject streams. So the medics have their own stream. So you have a specific medicine related topic. I won't go through all the kind of topics that we do, but broadly speaking, there's lots of ethical debates that they do, particularly around interview season, because that often comes up in MMIs. Talk about sort of medical technologies, actually quite a lot, sort of new drugs, new sort of machinery that they use and that are being developed. as well as different sort of specialities within medicine, because obviously there's a lot. It's good to have a bit of an idea of what different kinds of medicine look like. And I think these sort of what's written on the slide sums it up relatively well. The point is really to help you interact with your subject at a level higher than you're doing at school necessarily. And we actually got, so these are a couple of our seminar leads last year for medicine. Basically, this was one of the first seminars that we ran in the year, and just explaining sort of why they think it's a good idea and what they see as the point from it. Oh, God damn it. Here we are.
So the aims of these whole enrichment supervisions are supposed to be 24. It's supposed to guide you throughout your application with your wider reading. So everyone knows that you have to do wider reading to support your medical application, to sort of demonstrate that you have an insight into medicine. But the other thing that these enrichment supervisions will do is supposed to help you increase your confidence in discussing these different aspects of your wider reading, because that's what you're going to be asked to do at interview. So I think the best place to start building up your confidence is probably on here and talking in this group. And hopefully throughout all of the wider reading that we'll be doing with you, you'll be feeling a bit more prepared for life as a medical student and as a doctor as well.
Now, if you're sat there thinking, well, I haven't been doing this, what I would say is this is a really good way to prepare for interviews. If you did want to speak to one of our team about support, what we do is we record them all so that students can sort of catch up. So there's a lot of content and material that you can work through. Naturally, you can't engage with it as much when you record, but what students will often do is sort of go through the seminars and then discuss that one-to-one with their tutor so that they can then have that sort of higher level discussion that they want to have. And again, if you're sitting there thinking that you want to do it on your own, try and emulate this as much as you can. It's tricky, we put these seminars together because it is difficult to do something like this on your own. But I'm sure you've got a month. If you apply yourself very well, then you might be able to come up with something. And then the intensive courses. So we do have intensive courses for basically everything. So they're for the admissions test, for the personal statement, but for the interviews in particular, we host them basically the next 4 weeks. We have intensive interview courses pretty much every weekend. And they're there for you to firstly work in a bit of a group setting. So, work there with other potential, upcoming medical applicants, sort of work collaboratively and develop with each other. Obviously, you've got a tutor there supporting you, but it's there so that you can really learn as a group. And of course, an interview is an interactive thing. So that's quite a helpful dynamic to get into. This is something that I like to talk about because not many people know about it. This is data. So sorry, that was the programs. That's basically encompasses everything that we do. Specifically, what an individual student does really does depend on their specific recommendation that they get given. So if it does sound like any of those parts might be helpful, please do have a chat with us. This page is information published by the University of Oxford. So both Oxford and Cambridge will tell you how many students from your school get in to those institutions. Sadly, for other medical schools, we don't have this data, or at least we're not aware of it being out there. Hopefully we can run some freedom of information requests so we can have a look. But actually, this is quite a helpful tool. Particularly if you're sort of at the early stages in your application, you can get a sense for, well, how much will my school be able to help me? And you could relate this to interview support. How good is my school at actually helping students prepare for interviews? And you can see here, so these are basically the top sort of 15, 20 schools, some of them state, some of them independent, and top in terms of number of people who apply, not in terms of, well, probably as well in terms of A-levels and GCSEs, but that's not to do with this. But what you can see is it varies a lot. And one thing that schools will often say is how many students, if they're doing well, how many students got an offer from Oxford or Cambridge that year, but rarely will they tell you how many actually tried to apply. So they might say, we got 10 offers, and that's fantastic if they had 11 applicants. It's amazing if they had 11 applicants. It's not as reassuring if they had 100. And so this is actually quite helpful, just so that you have that understanding. And if you think actually, so to give you some context, the average acceptance rate to Oxford or Cambridge, across Oxford and Cambridge, for a UK national student is about 23%. So if you look at this information and you see that your school is below that, you might think, well, I need to have a serious chat with them about what they're going to do to help me with this application. And if you're not happy with that, then obviously sort of you want to do something else. Equally, if they're above that, then you might think, okay, well that's pretty reassuring, that's pretty good. But of course, naturally, you're going to want to get in. That's very, very important. So, this is just a helpful thing to be aware of, and certainly worth looking up if you haven't done so far. It's worth saying, so I think, I'm afraid I've forgotten our medical acceptance rate, but last year our Oxbridge overall across all subjects was 61. So 61% of our students didn't get offers. No, did get offers, sorry. That does mean that 39% didn't. And there are a few reasons why that is. But that's again something to compare with, and to have a sense of sort of where your school stands amongst other schools compared to the average, and compared to what else you could achieve doing something slightly different. This cooling off period relates to our support, actually. So naturally, I like to think that I'm a pretty good consultant. I like to think I've got a good handle of whether or not I think as a student has the right stuff, has the right attitude, and could get an offer. And I like to think that I'm good at making recommendations for students, but sadly, I'm not perfect. And sometimes we take on students and it's pretty clear pretty early on that actually the program isn't quite what they were looking for. It's not quite right for them. And that's fine. Basically what we do is, so if you're interested in interview support, you have 5 days to sort of give it a go and see how it works. And if it's not working, you can withdraw from the program and we refund you. If you're a longer term student, you have a couple of weeks actually to get a sense of if this is right for you. And it's not going to be right for everyone. We normally have about 2% of our students, 2 to 3% of our students end up withdrawing. Some students, might even change their program whilst they're on it. They might sort of adjust things slightly, but about 2 to 3% will withdraw. And again, that's fine. It's much better. I would much rather that you were in a program that was right for you than you were in our program, because ultimately at the end of the day, what matters is you getting an offer. That's what you're here for. That's what we're here for. So ultimately, it's much better that you're in the program that's actually going to help you do that. Okay. Just a quick note about reviews. Please leave us them. Whether they're positive or negative, they are helpful and they will mean that we can improve. Sorry, I'm just fetching for my charger. And one thing that people often, we normally only get reviews from people who have been in programs. And obviously that's great. It means that we sort of have a sense of what's working and what doesn't. We can make changes to things that aren't. But we don't get so many reviews for people who maybe they just have a consultation with us, but then they don't go any further. Or, maybe they come to an open day and I appreciate it. It takes time to leave reviews, but if you do have feedback for us, we pay very close attention to it. And we always appreciate it, whether it's positive, whether it's negative, whether you've interacted with us for months or you've only interacted with us once, it's always really helpful. Okay. Trustpilot is the one that we pay most attention to. You can use other review systems and we will see it, but Trustpilot is the best one. A couple final things that I want to talk about. The first is the foundation. So if you're sat there thinking, I like the idea of support, but, I'm in a position financially where actually paying for extra help for my application is going to be very difficult. There's a high chance that we can actually help you for free. So last year we had 93 students that we supported completely for free. And they had, of those things that I was talking about earlier, they had everything. We're currently sat at around, I think we've got about 150 students for this year. Applications have closed for this year. It takes a little while to review them, and actually it ends up we don't really have enough time to get everything going. So for this year, I'm afraid applications have closed. But if you're applying for next year, or if you know someone who is, and you think actually they could do with help, but they are struggling financially, they should get in touch. We're very keen to try and help as many people as we can. We're hoping that we can get to the point where for every student who's paying for help, we can actually help someone for free. That's the goal here. Whether or not we'll make it, I'm hoping we'll make it, but it's tricky because actually we just don't have many people apply. So yeah, if there's someone that you know, or if you are someone who might benefit from this, do get in touch. I always like to talk about our podcast. So Rohan and I, Rohan is the founder of UniAdmissions. We try to spend a bit of time every couple of weeks talking about something. Exactly what it is varies quite a lot, but we normally alternate between talking about applications, medicine, Oxbridge, and then talking more broadly about science, things like that. So we had a discussion. Our last one was pre-COP26 coming up. So we had a bit of a discussion about, climate change. Neither of us are climate scientists, but we talked about it. And the plan is to hopefully do another one quite soon. So to sort of review what we thought of what came up. And again, it's just, broadly speaking, science or applications. If you think that might be interesting, do have a listen. What is going to run in the background? So I'm going to take questions now. What's running in the background is basically just an animation which will show you how you can get in touch with us if you want to. The best way is to book a session. One of the team will have a chat with you, and they'll be able to talk about your application, things like that. But yeah, so hopefully that's very clear. I'm going to go through some of your questions now. So someone has asked, if you are worse at interviews but tick all the other boxes, would you recommend applying to Cambridge as opposed to Oxford? Sorry, I meant apply to Oxford as opposed to Cambridge. So I was going to say, no, I'd recommend the other way around. So you're right. The thing about applying to Cambridge is if you get to interviews, you actually haven't progressed that far. And that's not to belittle having an interview at Cambridge. That's really good. But depending on your subject, between sort of 60 to 90% of the people who applied are still there with you. So they could still sort of take your place, basically. Whereas with Oxford, that the vast majority of applicants have already been screened out. So if you get to interview, there's only a few more people there who you're sort of competing against. And, it's not always nice to think of it as a competition, but ultimately it is. So yeah, definitely, if you think that actually your strong points are the tests and your grades, then Oxford is a better choice. I'd also recommend, naturally people can be better or worse at interviews, but it's definitely a skill that you can develop. It takes time, but it's definitely a skill you can develop. So apply in your favor. So make applications in your favor. So yes, but then also work on that, because, you could still miss out because of having, not super strong interview performance. William McLeod has received an interview offer from Sunderland yesterday. Well done. Congratulations. Hopefully that goes well. But so yeah, so we're getting some offers out now. Hopefully you get more coming through because from your other applications. But yes, and for anyone who hasn't heard anything yet, that's not a source of panic. William, I'm sure you've done very well in your application, but sadly it's not the case that you were the best applicant, and that's why you've been asked early. But obviously you've done well, so well done. People who are a bit worried, please don't be. Caroline says, I was a bit late. I missed what you said about this year's BMAT. How will they ensure it's fair this year, given delays due to tech failures and retakes for those who didn't get it done on the 3rd of November? Will results be the 26th still? I don't think Cambridge Assessments has sort of specified yet. It's worth Googling this, but it's likely that the results will still be on the same day, which was one of your questions. What normally happens actually is they know your result way before they give the results out. And normally they tell the universities your result directly. So actually before 26th of November, universities will know what your BMAT score is in any given year. What was I going to say? And actually, you could get an interview offer from a BMAT university before you know your BMAT grade. So they do know that, and there has been a delay in for retakes, but I anticipate the results will come on the same day. In terms of how will they ensure it's fair? So this is a tricky one. The exact same thing happened last year. So Cambridge assessments did not learn from their mistake. It was shambolic last year. It seems to have been pretty shambolic this year. In terms of just the sheer quantity of students that it didn't work for, which is bizarre because the UCAT can do it. I don't know why they don't speak to UCAT consortium and say, well, how are you guys doing it? Because they've been doing it for years and it's been fine. I suppose they do things slightly differently, but yeah, I don't know why they're still struggling with it so much. In terms of how will they ensure it's fair, different medical schools will approach it differently. We'll see exactly what's to come. There have been some announcements from medical schools in terms of what they're, what they're doing, and of course there are people retaking it. There were people. So what did happen last year for some students was if it was so bad that the grade was sort of meaningless, they were from some universities they were just asked to interview. They said, "Don't worry about it, we'll interview you." Some universities said, we want you to take it again, and sort of slow down the application process. So it does depend a bit on the university. Sadly, I don't think they do a fantastic, well, I didn't think they did a fantastic job of making sure the system was completely fair last year. I hope they do a slightly better job this year. But what we did notice is that the interviews seem to be a bit more important. Because, you're right, how will they really ensure that it's fair? It'll be tricky. The better thing to do is to pay slightly less attention to it and wait away from the BMAT. Doesn't mean they're going to disregard it completely. If you did fantastically in your BMAT, they'll still look at that and that's great. But if you had those problems, it's likely that they might evaluate you with less of an emphasis on the BMAT. Sam's asked how much attention do different universities give to special consideration, thinking of the BMAT. So yeah, it's a bit of a, not all universities are very clear how they approach it. Talking about special considerations more broadly, it's a tricky thing to pin down exactly what sort of a quantitative exact percentage amount or proportion that it makes a difference. There will be a system whereby I think you say that you've heard about a rating system whereby I guess the severity of the special considerations is sort of banded. That's certainly something that they do, but again, exactly what those bands look like is going to vary quite a lot, and then exactly what impact that makes is going to make a difference. What is going to be different depending on the medical school. Thinking about the BMAT, again, there are a few different things that medical schools can do. Deprioritize BMAT. People retake, or actually just not worry about it at all and just invite you for an interview. And we'll see exactly what every different medical school decides to do. What's the minimum BMAT score I need to go to Oxford this year? That's a good question. Ultimately, it depends on the rest of your application. So if you remember earlier, there was that pie chart. Pre-interview, Oxford are basically looking at sort of BMAT and GCSEs. So if your GCSEs are lower, then your BMAT score needs to be higher. If your GCSEs are higher, ideally you still want as good a BMAT score as you can get, but you can afford to have a lower BMAT score. Now, there's rarely a specific, if you get above this mark, whoever you are, you will get an interview, particularly for Oxford. What I normally, as a rule of thumb, what I normally tell students to aim for is to have above 6s in section 1 and 2. And if they're an international student, to have above 7s. Provided that's combined with a good academic record. That's obviously important. If your grades are very low, then well, if your grades are low, then it needs to be higher. How was my interview at Oxford University? Did I feel confident coming out of the interview? So that's a good question. So I had two interviews. One was the college that I applied to, Christchurch, and one was at Wadham. I came out of my Christchurch interview having really enjoyed it and felt like it had gone well. But of course, it's always difficult, it's impossible to really know. I came out of the Wadham interview. Well, I say it's impossible to know. I came out of the Wadham interview knowing that it hadn't gone very well. Now, the reason what they were asking me some questions, which I think they were trying to get me to talk about proprioception, which is your sense of where your limbs and muscles are basically across your body. I didn't realize that, and sort of talked about something else. In hindsight, that was very silly, but just in the moment, I didn't twig the cues that they were giving me. They also at Wadham, they gave me a paper to read, sort of for 20 minutes before the interview. And so I spent that 20 minutes feeling pretty confident. I sort of read through it, understood it, knew what was going on. Walked in with it in my hands. They were like, they took it, so they said thanks, they popped it to one side, and then we didn't talk about it. They asked me these other things, one of them being about proprioception, which I missed. And then sort of 25 minutes later, they said, right, let's talk about this paper. By which point I'd forgotten everything. I was not very good at being able to sort of recollect the things that I was thinking and, working through it. So that was that was not as good. And I did come out feeling less confident, but people pay a lot of attention, or people put a lot of weight on how they feel as they come out of an interview. You can come out of an interview thinking it went very badly and it have gone well. Okay. There are people that I know who thought that their interviews went very badly and they got an offer. You can also think it went very well and not get an offer. So whilst it is good, it's an okay thing to sort of think and to feel, and maybe to feel a bit confident coming out of it that you might get an offer, but try not to over analyze it and over extrapolate, because ultimately it's difficult to know what they were thinking. So yes, try not to worry about it too much. What I tell students to do is do your interviews, enjoy them, then forget about it. Enjoy Christmas as much as you can. Don't even think about it. Don't worry about it. And then hopefully in January, you have a very nice surprise. Now, naturally, it's impossible to forget about it, but that's really the best way to do it. It's not worth agonizing over. Obviously, if you're a medic, so you're going to have lots of other interviews, so you can distract yourself with those, hopefully. How much do universities care about Section 3 of the BMAT? So it does depend a bit. There are some universities that have basically a bit of a cutoff for the Section 3. But actually, the majority of students get an A, sort of an A. And when the cutoff is often related to the alphabetic grade. So the majority of students get an A or a B. Very few students get C's and below, and that's where the cutoff can start to come. For the sort of score out of 5, again, it's sort of broadly quite the distribution of grades is sort of around the 3.54 mark. What I see is that Section 1 and Section 2 matter more. That's the sense, because Section 1 and Section 2, the results have a pretty strong association with who gets an offer. And that's what, so when we do our pie chart, people often ask, well, what is this information based on? It's based on, clues that Oxford and Cambridge give, but it's also based on what we see the data telling us. We can see very nice distributions of admissions test grades, and we can see how that associates with who gets an offer and who doesn't. And basically Section 1 and Section 2 seem to have a stronger association. I've got a couple of questions in the chat. If you are sick on the day of your interview, what do you do? And this is a good question. So ultimately, you should tell them. If you're very unwell, it's highly likely that they can rearrange it if you're really unwell. You obviously need to sort of prove it. And, you know, I'm sure they'll ask for a doctor's note, but it's very likely that they'll be able to rearrange. But yeah, just tell them as early as possible. If you've been sick the couple of days before, it's worth telling them and say, look, I feel like I'll be okay, but just to let you know, I have been unwell with XYZ. I'll keep you updated. All you can do is tell them, and you know, tell them as much information as they need, and then hopefully they'll be able to reschedule you. You know that they're doing lots of interviews. It's highly likely that they'll be able to fit you in another time. Will they discuss your essay at interview? So I'm assuming this is the section 3 BMAT essay. They could. It has happened. How frequently it happens, I don't think it happens very often, if I'm completely honest. I think they normally sort of have plenty of stuff to talk about without needing to talk about the essay, but it could happen. You know, and what you don't want to do is, again, sort of ignore it and then it come up. So what I normally tell students to do is, well, it's a bit late, but if you haven't, is to jot down what they talked about in their essay. Because obviously you do the BMAT and then, you know, over a month later, you have this interview, very difficult to remember what you talked about. So it's worth jotting down some key points of what you were trying to say, and just having that as something that you can review in the few days before you go in. Is it better to know one topic in detail or a bit about everything, but not in as much detail? Good question. My view is both, very unhelpfully. If I had to pick one, I would say one topic in detail. And this is, you know, for medicine, you do want to have a bit of a broad, you know, you want to demonstrate that you know, or at least have engaged with a fair amount of stuff. But broadly across all subjects, what they're really looking for is someone who is really interested in their subject. Okay, they're really keen on that. And if that subject is a very niche, specific thing, which is relevant, then that's going to look great. I spent, so in the interview that went well, I was asked quite a few questions. I was asked a bit about my personal statement. I think I was asked 2 or 3 questions in my personal statement. I don't know how well I answered it. I did regret putting it in my personal statement. So in my school, I was involved with a couple of my history teachers in a project which was basically designed to raise awareness for genocides, because, well, the feeling, it was particularly spearheaded by one of my history teachers who I really liked and sort of got involved with it. The feeling was that they're sort of, you know, there have been genocides in very recent history and people don't really talk about it. So the idea was to try and raise awareness and sort of make sure that people knew that these things were happening. And I was asked in the interview whether I thought it was psychology's responsibility to stop genocide, which is a bit of a tricky one. And, you know, sort of caught me off guard. And I thought, oh, I wish I'd never put that in now. But you know, they can ask about the personal statement. They can ask about it in the essay. Whether or not they will, it's difficult to say. But if you know a specific topic in detail and you talk about it with them, that's going to look good. But yeah, my cop-out answer is do both. Know lots and also know lots about one thing. So someone has said, my GCSEs are not that great, but it was teacher's assessment. Will it affect your chance of getting an offer? So if you remember the pie chart, the grades was a quarter. We actually changed that from a third when grades started to be teacher assessed, because what we saw and what we predicted was that they were going to pay less attention to them. Okay, so we actually modified that weighting down based on what you're talking about. It's still a fair chunk though. You know, there are some medical schools which have absolute rules. You need X grade in maths, you need X grade in English. If you haven't got that, it's very difficult to get anywhere with those. And you need to apply sensibly to universities which will actually consider you. It depends a bit on what you mean by not that great. And it depends on where you're applying. you said, I think this is the same, but it just says anonymous attendee, but I think you said that you're in year 11. Ultimately, wait, so as in you, well, so then you haven't sat your GCSEs yet, or you have, and you're in year 12. I'm not sure. If you haven't set your GCSEs yet, then there's still time. If you have, then you need to be sensible about where you're applying to. I would recommend having a chat with one of us, because often actually part of the consultation can be a bit of a discussion about where you might want to apply. We won't spend too long talking about it, but you probably give you a bit of a starting point of what to be looking at. Okay. That is, I believe, all the questions that I have. So if anyone has further questions, now's the time to ask. If not, best of luck to you all for your interviews. All you can do is prepare and get ready. Oh, we've had another one. Will we be able to ask you about the chance of getting an interview? So, Hafsa, today I probably won't do it sort of on an individual basis. If you have a discussion with one of the team, what we will normally do is actually, so I can explain it a bit so that you have a bit more of an idea of what's going on. In our consultations, what we will do is we will ask you lots and lots of questions. Okay. It can feel a bit over the top sometimes, but actually what we want to do is have a really good understanding of who you are, where you are in your application, what you've done so far, and what you need. As part of that, at the end of that, what we'll do is if we think that like our programs aren't right for you, we'll say, best luck with the application and, wish you well. If we think that there's a program that's right for you, we'll sort of say, I think this might actually be really helpful. Do you want me to tell you more about it? That kind of thing. But we'll also actually know, well, normally we have a pretty good sense of if you're going to get an interview or not. And again, if we don't think you'll get an interview, we're not going to help you with preparing for the interview. If I can say, obviously there's no certainty about it, but if I can say I'm 90% confident that you won't get an interview, then, going through the process of preparing for it when we know it's not going to come is a tricky one. Obviously, I'm not going to say just give up. If you get invited for an interview, then fantastic. But it just, if I was 20% sure you weren't going to get an interview, so 80% sure you were, then I'd say, yeah, let's do it. Even if I was 50% sure you get an interview, I still think that's a risk worth taking and putting the time into it. So normally, one of the team, depends if I've trained them well enough, but one of the teams should be able to have a decent sense of if you're going to get an interview or not, and they'll be able to tell you. Amina has asked, how should we prepare for ethical scenarios at interviews? So, firstly, if you haven't spent any time thinking about medical ethics or kind of the kind of medical ethical questions you could get, it's worth having a bit of a research into what kind of discussions are happening. Very often, sort of the resource allocation question comes up because obviously the NHS is a stretched resource, and that is something which is considered on probably a daily basis. But you can also get those kind of one of the other SJT ones that they like to use a lot is one of your friends is in the actual SJT is one of your friends has asked you if they can copy you what's the most appropriate thing to do. Those kind of things as well. It's not too hard to know that you shouldn't let them copy you. That's not too hard, but sort of having a proper discussion about it is a bit harder. I would have a look at ethical scenarios if you haven't. I would practice them with someone because it's not a technical question. Anyone can sort of ask you it and you can have that discussion. And actually, it might be worth teaching some medical ethical principles to someone who doesn't know it. Again, that's the best way to test if you actually know something, is to teach someone else it. And if they then know it, then you know it really well. What is the expected GCSE result I need to go to Oxford Medicine? The average Oxford medic has 10.2 A stars at GCSE. when universities are looking at GCSEs, they're predominantly looking at two things. One, the quantity of A stars, so the number of 8s and 9s that you have, and also the ratio of A stars to non-A star grades. So actually, there are some students who do sort of 13 GCSEs and they get, 9 A stars, an A, 2 Bs, and a C. That's weaker than an applicant who has 8 A stars and nothing else. Because yes, they have one more A star, but their ratio is poor. So that the typical Oxford ratio, I think, is about 0.91 A stars to non-A star grades. So that's the average. Obviously, students, as it's an average, there will be students who get below that grade and get offers, but that'll need to be combined with a way above average, well, an above average BMAT score. It's worth saying that there is quite a big skew for GCSE grades towards the top. So there's a massive ceiling effect in GCSEs. That's why they have tests. They have admissions tests because it's too hard to work out from the GCSEs who's a good student or not, because everyone's good. That should give you a sense of how important those admissions tests are if they design them to help them work out who to take on. If you were too below sort of straight A stars, you might want to start thinking about applying to Cambridge, because you've got a much higher chance of getting an interview, and then you might be able to sort of pull things back at the interview stage. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense. Again, I'm not saying you need to have 8 A stars or more, or there's no point, because it's always contextual, but you want to make sure that you're making applications that are sensible for you. At the end of the day, you want to do medicine, right? Once you're a doctor, it doesn't matter too much if you did medicine at Oxford or if you did it at UCL. Really, most junior doctors will sort of confirm this. It doesn't matter too much if you want to be a doctor. If you want to do something else, then yeah, it makes a difference. But for your first 5 to 10 years, we don't really see it making that much difference. So prioritize getting offers. If you can go for Oxford and Cambridge, fantastic, do it. But don't waste an application. You only get 4. You only get 4. You can't, if you know that one of them isn't going to work, and you're left with 3, that's not very many. Okay. I've run down all the questions again. Final opportunity for anyone to ask anything, if you have anything that I haven't talked about yet that you'd like to ask about. Remember again, if you're sat there thinking, oh, I don't want to ask a question, someone else might benefit from the answer. So it's always worth asking. It might be a question I can't answer. We do get those sometimes, and I have to do a bit of research, and that's always quite nice. Is there an advantage from doing an intercalated year? So when you say intercalated, I assume you mean whilst you're doing medicine. Yeah, good. So there is definitely. So they recently, I think last year, they changed the way that the intercalation credit system works. So I don't actually think you get credits from intercalating anymore. But depending on what you intercalate in, it's a really good thing to do. Or what I've seen from medical students that do it, I haven't spoken to anyone who regretted intercalating. No one said that was a bad idea. And actually, what you'll find is you are way ahead of when you come back from your intercalation. If you do a clinical intercalation, you are going to be way ahead of the other students in your year. Obviously, you've had a year extra teaching from them, but it's going to make an enormous difference, not just to your degree, but also to you being a doctor. My partner did an intercalation in Bristol at the Bristol Royal Infirmary on the intensive care unit last year. So, deepest, darkest COVID times is not a good time to be on an intensive care unit, but actually it means that she is way ahead of the other students who she's now gone back and joined. So she intercalated between her 4th and 5th year. So she's now in her last year. And she's far more competent than any of the others. So it does make a big difference, particularly if you do a clinical one. If you do a non-clinical one, a research one, and that's going to make a big difference if you want to go into research. That is very, very, very helpful. It's going to make a big difference. You'll probably potentially get a publication out of it if you do a good job. That's a really good thing to have under your belt. Intercalation places are limited. You have to apply. Not everyone gets them. And the rules vary a lot from university to university. So my partner actually studies at Birmingham, but they do intercalations within the university, but also externally. So she's an external one. But yeah, I think it's a good idea. Disadvantage is it's another year of university. I loved university. What would be better than another year of university? But from a financial perspective, it's another year of fees and potentially another year of student loans. So it's that is something to consider. It also means, from my partner's perspective, she feels like she's taken a bit of a step back because actually it's a bit easy now, which you can see as a disadvantage, I suppose. I think that fantastic. Why not? But yeah, it could feel like, particularly if you're clear clinical for that year, it could feel a bit like a step back if you're going into your fourth or fifth year. What else? That's kind of it. I can't really think of anything else which is bad about it. Is it worth taking the BMAT as well as the UCAT, or is it best to sit for one exam and apply to medical schools that utilize the specific exam? You should definitely sit both, Amina. I have not been in a scenario where I've ever recommended someone to only sit one, I don't think. I would prepare for and sit both. Naturally, you'll know after you do your UCAT, you'll know if it's gone well or not. So if it's gone fantastically, you might think, actually, I'm not going to bother with BMAT. And, it's ill-advised, but fine. If it goes terribly, you have to do the BMAT, okay? But consider this. You'll do your UCAT in August, most likely. Most students sit it sort of August, September. You're then going into year 13. So you're going to be busy with A-levels. And you need to do your personal statement. Now, if you're early, middle September, you've just started school, you're busy, and you then find out that you're going to have to sit the BMAT, that gives you a lot to do alongside everything else. You're much better off preparing for both and being in the situation where you can say, I don't need to sit the BMAT, rather than putting yourself in a situation where you can't manage everything at once. The most typical thing that I'd recommend a student to do if they don't have any solid university preferences and we don't have anything that means that they need to apply to particular universities, is to do 1 BMAT and 3 UCAT, or 2 BMAT and 2 UCAT. It's a pretty good thing to go with. Particularly, it sounds like you've sort of got a year's time, so you've got plenty of time to prepare for both. I know it's an extra exam. Rarely do people opt into exams, but actually you will probably be glad you did it. And yeah, it opens up a lot of options, Imperial, UCL. Some people say, I categorically don't want to go to any of the BMAT universities. And I say back to them, well, do you want to go and study medicine? Yes, well, then you should do it. But, ultimately, it's your decision at the end of the day. Caroline. Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, it was really good. If you're, a prospective medical student, I would really look into intercalations. There's a lot of different things on offer. Look into it early. My partner did it between her 4th and 5th year, but that's quite strange. Normally it's between 3rd and 4th year. But yeah, no, she had a fantastic time. It was, technically speaking, it was a bit weird. So she studies at Birmingham. The intercalation was run by the University of Plymouth, and there are about 12 people on the intercalation, and they were all dotted around in intensive care units across the country. So she had to, well, it was during COVID. She was going to go to Plymouth sort of once a month for things, but that never ended up happening. But yeah, always, you don't really need to think about it in your first year, but at the start of your second year, it's worth having a look into intercalation opportunities and seeing what you can do. If you fail your intercalation year, does it affect your MB? Does it affect your medicine if it was not compulsory for your course? I don't know. I wouldn't have thought it would make a difference because it's a separate degree. If you intercalate, you end up with 2 degrees. So I imagine you just don't get your second degree, which is obviously sad. But actually, I don't think it will make any impact on your actual medical degree. I might have to double check that, but I don't think so. And then, are there any resources that you would recommend to study for the BMAT and the UCAT? I mean, I would have a chat with one of my team. Well, they're not my team anymore because I'm studying, but one of the team at UniAdmissions. There are there's lots of stuff you can use. UCAT Consortium has a few sort of practice papers you can do. We make lots of books. You know, obviously, I think our books are pretty good. You know, other books exist as well, but you know, we put quite a lot of effort into our books. But there's a lot out there, and you know, it's. I would have a chat with one of us, and then have a look at other things. You know, students often feel a bit bashful when they say, you know, I need to have a look at other programs. And I say, no, please do. I want you on a good program, and I want you on a program that's right for you. Very, very important. So yeah, naturally our resources are great, but other resources exist. Hafsa, your line, what it was Imperial, I don't understand, I'm afraid. If that is a genuine question, then if you could type it out again in another way, then I should be able to answer it. And then we'll probably wrap up there. What if it was Imperial, the intercalated year? Okay, so you're asking, what if you studied at Imperial, did an intercalation, and then failed the intercalation? Yeah. Again, I don't think it would make a difference. And actually, so I don't know what the criteria are for failing necessarily. As far as I know, people don't really fail, but it shouldn't make a difference. What I would do is, like I said, you know, enjoy your first year as much as you can. You'll be working very hard, but have a good time. Then at the start of second year, maybe even at the end of first year, start having a look into it. And I'm sure you'll be able to find out from your uni directly. They normally have a couple talks actually where they sort of talk about intercalations, and you'll be able to find out exactly how it all works. And different intercalations will be marked differently, right? So if you're doing an academic intercalation, maybe you're doing a history of medicine dissertation, that's going to be assessed very differently to how Amber was on her clinical placement. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about it. You've got worry about your interviews first. It's nice talking about intercalations because people really enjoy them and they're good fun, but you can worry about that a bit further down the line. Hopefully this is encouraging though. Hopefully you're all going to intercalate and have a wonderful time. Right, fantastic. I am going to call things there. Thank you very much for coming along. If you think up of more questions later on today, tomorrow, you can email us or set up a time to chat with us. And even if you think it's a simple look, I just want a yes or no answer to this question, we're still going to want to know everything about you. I know it takes time, but what we don't want to do is make recommendations that actually end up being wrong. And students often think that it's this very simple yes or no question. And I have to explain to them, no, because if you tell me X, then my answer will be Y. If you tell me A, my answer will be B. And it depends. It almost always depends. So bear with us while we ask our questions. Hopefully we'll be able to help you at the end. Someone's just asked about recordings. Yes, it should. I believe we send them out to your emails sort of in the next day or two. So you should get the recording sent to you. If you don't, drop us an email. But yeah, I think that's automated now. I think you'll get that through. All right, fantastic. Best of luck to all of you for your interviews. Well done for getting through the BMAT crisis, and well done for getting to this stage. Keep it up, and hopefully you will have some lovely offers in the new year. All right, take care, everyone. Bye bye.